Now, when this book came out, so as you heard in the introduction, I've actually published several books on suicide terrorism. The first came out in 2005. And then our last book, Cutting the Fuse, just came out last fall. And the thing I want to tell you about that is when that book came out, we had our opening conference on the book on Capitol Hill. We had an all-day conference on Capitol Hill from 9 in the morning until 5 at night with 300 people. A donor generously bought 300 books to give away. It turns out you can't sell a book on Capitol Hill. We had people that you'd be familiar with from television, say Peter Bergen coming to speak at the conference. The head of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Kane, came to speak at our conference. If you look at our book, you'll see that both heads of the 9/11 Commission have endorsed the research on the back of the book. But the most important thing that happened at that conference was the talk by Admiral Gary Roughead, the Chief of Naval Operations. He is the head of the Navy. There are 350,000 people who work in the Navy. There's one CNO. He is the head of the Navy. He came to talk about the, quote, Navy's role in offshore balancing. Offshore balancing, you're going to see, is the policy that comes out of our research. And he announced at our conference that offshore balancing would be the policy of the Navy in the future. And that's really quite important. First of all, you can go on YouTube and you can find it on the C-SPAN video of his talk. Everything this day and age must be on video or it hasn't happened, right? So it is on YouTube. You can easily find it. It's only a 12-minute talk, so it's easy to listen to. But that's very important because where's that coming from? That was not coming from President Obama. That wasn't coming from an order from his boss, Secretary Gates. That was coming from the research. Now, what is it about the research that's leading some fairly prominent folks to pay this much attention to it? Well, as you're going to hear the bottom lines, it's not really the bottom lines. In fact, the bottom lines, you'll see, would tend to make people hesitant. So what is it about the research that would make these prominent people pay so much attention to it? It's the quality of the data. The data, and you're going to find yourself asking the question as you hear more about the conclusions, how good is the data? The Admiral would ask, how good is the data? Congressmen would ask, how good is the data? Folks in the intelligence services, how good is the data? So let's talk about the data, the database, in a little bit more detail before we get to the bottom lines to start to show you that it is quite reliable data. Because after all, we live in an internet age where we're so used to garbage information on the internet, gossip, anonymous internet chat room information. That's not what you're going to see here. What you're going to see here is every bit of information has been verified with a minimum of 2 independent sources of data. Very hard verified data. But to do that, let me show you what it's like if you go to our website. If you go to our website, the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism, you'll see that we have a large database on the web that you can search for free. Now, I hope you don't mind. We're still rather proud of our Capitol Hill conference. This was the first conference by the University of Chicago on Capitol Hill ever. It's not that easy to have a conference on Capitol Hill. This takes some support from Congress because that's the only way. You don't buy a room on Capitol Hill. That just doesn't happen. If you go to our database, search the database, and I want to just give you an example. Well, first of all, you can go to our people page and you'll see our native language speakers. These are the folks who I was telling you about who do Arabic, Hebrew, Tamil, Russian. Of course, we have also English speakers as well, so this is just a partial list, but this gives you a sense of the support we have on the team. But let's go to the database. And let's search the database by location, and I'm just going to pick Lebanon because many of you are familiar with Hezbollah, the famous suicide terrorist group. So I'm going to toggle Lebanon, and you'll see you actually have various levels of granularity here in the factors. And then you'll see that since 1980, there have been a total of 38 suicide attacks. And this number, these are going to start to become very important, you said. But how good is that number? Well, first you see a list of the attacks. Okay, we're listing them out underneath. But if you go over to the left, you see you can start to view details under the attack. So let's view a detail of the very first attack. And there on this card for the attack, you see, oh, it's not just information about the date and number killed, but very often we have the name of the suicide attacker, socioeconomic data about the suicide attacker. And this is just one card for one attack. We have 2,200 suicide attacks in our database. So this is just one card. But again, how good is the data? This is still just summary information. At the bottom, you see sources. And so far, they just look like footnotes. Those are those independent sources I mentioned. But if you go and look at the left, again, you can see the button for View Source. So let's view the source. And you can push the button and see the actual textual source, the actual text of each and every one of those sources. And very often, we have 4 and 5 for each attack. So that means we have over 10,000 documents online for those 2,200 attacks. And this is information you can access for free online. No $2,000 buy-in to get into the information. We have made it difficult for you to push a button and just steal the database, okay? But this is something that's very, very important because it's not just important to have a, quote, verifiable database that somebody could verify if they spent all the time to do it. This is a verified database, so that we have spent the time to actually show you. And if you think we left you out an attack or a series of attacks, you just go ahead and send us an email, and man, our research team, we're on it. They want nothing more, nothing makes them happier than going and trying to find more attacks to put in our database. That's just what we live for. So if you think we missed something, or you don't think we coded it right, you just let us know. We're just right on there. But now, what is in the database? What does it show? I want to talk about the patterns of suicide terrorism in 2 parts. First, from 1980 to 2003, think about that as the world of suicide terrorism before the Iraq War. And then 2004 on. Think about that as the world of suicide terrorism after Iraq. So let's first go to the first period. From 1980 to 2003, there were 343 completed suicide terrorist attacks defined in the classic sense you would expect of an individual killing himself, or herself on a mission to kill others. The world leader during this period is not an Islamic group. They're the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, a Marxist group, a secular group, a Hindu group. The Tamils in Sri Lanka did more suicide attacks than Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Further, a third of all Muslim suicide attacks at least are by purely secular groups such as the PKK in Turkey, which is another Marxist, read anti-religious suicide terrorist group. Overall, at least half of all those attacks are not associated with Islamic fundamentalism. Now think about that for a moment. What do most people think is driving not just terrorism, suicide, but just terrorism? Islamic fundamentalism. And this doesn't hold up in the data. There's huge numbers of non-Islamic suicide terrorists.